Your Honor, we call Ray.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, sir.
Yes.
Thank you.
Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you give in this case shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth and the penalty of perjury?
I do. Right. Thank you. So you go ahead and have a seat there, and then please state your name and spell your last. I, Ray, R-A-Y. Yes, sir. Ms. Taylor.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
Will you tell us what you do?
I have a handful of different jobs, but primarily for my role here, I do a lot of consulting, analysis, and evaluating geolocation data as it pertains to mobile devices.
Let's talk about how you got to that place where you provide consultation on devices and geolocation.
Okay.
What background led you to this job?
I started with a law enforcement background. I started my law enforcement career in 1995 in Arizona. Started working with the first set of cell phone records in that capacity in 97, late 1997. There wasn't a lot of training. Obviously, cell phone technology and the use of that in criminal investigations was very new and novel at that time. So most of my early training came directly from the carriers. If I was working a case with Verizon or AT&T, I would work directly with Verizon or AT&T engineers to understand the records, what they meant, how to map them, how to interpret them. In 2000, I started a very small police department in Arizona. In 2000, I transferred to a much larger police department in the Phoenix area. When I made that transition, I took more of an investigative role. I was previously a patrol officer. That investigative role, I started with a DEA task force where I worked with drug narcotic interdictions, and the primary role there was working with cell phone records. So I had some more training experience in that capacity. In 2001, late 2001, I left that position and I went into a full-time investigations position. I started with sex crimes and child crimes. Again, using cell phone records and attending what training was available. Again, most of that is from the carriers directly. About 2004, I moved out of sex crimes and child crimes into persons crimes or violent crimes. So any type of a dangerous or violent crime against a person. Continuing to work with cell phone records and attending what training I could. In 2008, I was promoted to sergeant, and I was immediately put into a homicide robbery sergeant's position, where I stayed until 2010. Around 2004, I started doing a lot of work with cell site simulators, and that is a piece of equipment that allows you to physically go out in the field and find a mobile device. In a very brief summary, it's the ability to create a fake cell tower that is mobile. It's in a vehicle. And if I can analyze your phone records and determine a rough area that you're at, I can put this mobile platform in that area. Your phone will register to it, and I can physically track the phones. It's in courtrooms, it's in a bedroom, wherever it may be. In 2007, our agency purchased that equipment. So prior to that, I was working with other agencies looking for devices using it. 2007, we purchased our own equipment. That purchase also prompted more training. There was a company, it's owned by Boeing. They came in and I had 80 hours at that point specific to cellular network engineering, how to go out and actually conduct these surveys to understand how a particular cell phone network works in a particular area, how to replicate, how to create a cell site that looks legitimate in that area. I worked with that company for a number of years in doing that, hundreds of hours worth of back and forth working, actually going out in the field and doing this. In 2010, I had an opportunity to go to Afghanistan as an advisor in charge of an undercover Afghan police team that targeted IED cells. And again, we would look at different types of technology that we could leverage in doing that. I came back in late 2010, early 2011, and went back to the police department. In 2012, our department created a position that this was a full-time position. Now that's all I did was track phones pretty much every day, using cell site simulators, using phone records, whatever technology we could leverage. Because of the lack of training that was available when I was a younger officer, in 2007 I started a training company. At the time it was called Phoenix Training, and I created a training company to provide law enforcement training, specifically as it relates to cell phone records. I've been providing that training from 2007 up to about 2013 now. I was really frustrated with the lack of software and training available to law enforcement. Very complex and clunky, for lack of a better term. So I began researching and teaching myself how to do some basic computer programming, and I wrote a program that I could take phone records from any carrier in the United States, and I could put it in this program, and it would immediately map hundreds, if not thousands, of connections. It was pretty unique at the time. There just wasn't a lot of options out there that was doing the geolocation. There was a lot of analytics to who's calling who and how often they call that person. But specifically to put it on a map for detailed geolocation data, there was a big gap in the market. It worked. It worked really, really well. And at the time, because we were tracking phones in the field, it gave me this very unique opportunity where I could use a search warrant, get phone records, analyze the phone records, come up with a hypothesis that this phone is most likely Thursday at 2 a.m. going to be in this neighborhood, and then physically go to that location to recover the phone. And then I could evaluate, was I right? Was I wrong? Do I need to tweak something? Mid-2013, our agency was assisting a lot of other agencies because we had, for lack of a better term, we had progressed significantly on our ability to find the phones. I had a lot of agencies asking me for a copy of my mapping program, and I was just about at 20 years at that point. I realized maybe it's time to go do something else. So in May of 2014, I retired from the police department, and I started a company called ZETX, Z-E-T-X. And we offered a couple different things. So we had the mapping program that I just described. Obviously, when I'm running it on my laptop, it can be a little clunky. It doesn't have to be perfect. When we started a business, we actually hired computer engineers to come in and take what I had written and scale it to a national platform. So we offered the mapping services, which was both real-time and historical. We took that original training class that I had built and we scaled it out. So we had a basic 40-hour that would just give you the nuts and bolts of how to look at phone records, what they need, what type of records to obtain. We also started a subject matter expert course. It was one of the first courses in the country where law enforcement could actually come in and become certified as subject matter experts in this field. Did some training courses as well that we created on drive testing, so the ability to go out and scan and monitor cellular networks. Because of those two features, my job duties changed dramatically, where I found myself consulting with law enforcement daily, sometimes multiple times in a day, on cases very similar to this case, where I would have a law enforcement agency that's using our product or has attended our training that would call me for some type of review or analysis. And I've lost count. It's thousands and thousands of cases. To put that in perspective for some just general numbers, I sold this company in 2021. At that time, around 2021, 2022, the system had mapped over 2 billion phone calls in the United States. We were seeing thousands of uploads a week. We had created this program in 2014 that if any law enforcement agency in the country called us because they had some type of crime, we would overnight them a drive test scanner, which gives them the ability to go out and do a forensic examination of cell tower networks. It was no cost. We ate all of the cost of this. So we paid for the scanners. Initially, we paid for the shipping. And the idea there is we wanted to create a national tower database that would have just a collection of drive tests. I want to say we have over 3 million towers in that database today that have been scanned or measured in some capacity. I am unaware of any other database in the world like it. And we use that to feed the mapping platform to increase the accuracy of the mapping. Something that we did that was very unique with our company is we actually provided an estimated coverage area. So instead of just saying this phone connected to this cell site in the antenna points north, we would give the person doing the analysis a general idea of where that phone could possibly be within a radius. We were the only ones doing it when we did this. Since then, since 2014, more recently, since about 2020, pretty much the rest of the industry has adopted, if not the same standard, a very similar standard. So the company we were using to do the drive test data is a company by the name of Road, ROHDE, and Schwarz, SCHWARZ. They're a German company out of Munich. They've adopted the way that we were doing some of the ranging. The FBI CAS team has adopted that, has actually brought that tower density, is what is the general term for it, and it's now featured in the CAS-BIS program. So through the years with training, I've probably been involved in training 30, maybe 35,000 law enforcement officers from around the country. We had about 650 law enforcement agencies within the United States. At some point, all of the federal agencies have used our products in their training, and I've done quite a bit of consulting internationally as well. Towards the end of that period, we started working more with Road and Schwarz. Road and Schwarz decided that they wanted to look at the ability to implement a cell site simulator in the United States. They had one for Europe. They were considering doing it for the United States. So they sent me their first one for the United States, and I worked with their engineers for about a year, testing it, reviewing it, improving it. So another several hundred hours there. I've tried to figure out how many of these missions, if you will, going out and finding a phone or looking at phone records, and it is literally thousands and thousands of hours at this point. I can't tell you the specific number. But that would be the background.
Sounds like your background is mostly in law enforcement, and then you moved into a specialty with cell phones, cell towers, drive testing, radio waves, all of that kind of thing.
That would be correct.
Through that and through the training of other officers to do this work and to use your program, have you testified as an expert in this field?
I have. If it's not 100 times, it's right there near it. Roughly 100 times in both state and federal.
And have you been qualified as an expert in state courts?
Yes.
In federal courts?
Yes.
How about Idaho?
Don't think I have in Idaho. I've consulted on a lot of cases in Idaho, but I don't think I've ever had testimony in Idaho.
This your first time then?
I believe it is.
Generally, when you work, and I'm talking about when you've done your consulting work or worked with an agency to do what you do to review the records and to analyze the data, do you usually work with the defense?
This is the first time I've ever testified for defense.
Fair to say you usually are a prosecution witness?
That is a very fair statement.
Well, here you are, and you're working with us in Mr. Kohberger's case. What's your role in this case?
Trying to conduct an analysis of all of the geolocation data, at this point still focused primarily on Mr. Kohberger's device, ultimately all devices, but any geolocation data, which is the ability to look at a specific area, whatever range or size that might be at a specific time, and put some type of accuracy and reliability to a phone's travel. Maybe it's stagnant, when it's moving, when it's not moving, when it's off, it's on, those type of things. But specifically as it relates to network, so the cellular network or a Wi-Fi network, I am not a forensic digital guy. I don't get into cell extractions. I'm not looking at the metadata on the phone. I'm looking at it very much as a network tool.
If I can make a rough distinction, you're not the person that's going to tell me who they called and which Facebook groups they might be a part of. You're not going to look at the data from the phone like photographs, but you're going to tell me the places this phone went and how it was used while it went somewhere.
Kind of. Let me clean that up a little bit. I will look first at where I believe the phone went, where it traveled, how it got there, how long it took, possible routes. And then to your point, I call it cooperative data. I'm then going to seek out all that data you just talked about to say, okay, well, we have these 3 photographs, we have this piece of surveillance video, we have these 4 receipts. I'm going to overlay it with my analysis so that I can corroborate the analysis accurate. Or maybe we see activity associated with that person and the phone's not there. Does that person just not have the phone, or is part of our analysis wrong? Maybe surveillance details wrong. We don't know. So eventually I will get back to that data you're talking about, but I'm not the guy that's going to go out and extract that data.
Would it be fair to say that that's data that you would use in a final analysis as it comes in from other sources, that you're the go-to for me to understand how a phone works with a tower and how it moves between towers if the phone's in motion somewhere?
Yes, 100%.
You talked a little bit about drive test data or drive testing, and that being part of the company that you developed and part of the work that you've done. Is that helpful in understanding the ultimate picture?
Depending on the type of records we're dealing with, it can be very helpful. When we're looking at just basic call detail records, CDRs, a lot of times we're just getting connections to a particular cell site, and we can say a PSI of that cell site. Sometimes the frequencies that are used. Drive testing is really the only way to get a little bit more specific with where that phone may be. But more importantly, we can start to rule out areas we know it's not by drive testing. So just think of drive testing as a forensic evaluation of the actual cellular network in a particular area.
Fair enough. Are you familiar with AT&T records?
I am intimately familiar with AT&T records.
How long do you think you've been working with AT&T records?
28 years.
In our case that we're here on today, have you reviewed any AT&T records that relate to Mr. Kohberger?
I have.
What have you reviewed?
What AT&T refers to as their regular CDRs, which is a report AU as an atom union. I have identified the report CT as in Charles Tom, which is the subscriber information. There's a really weird name called Locabor, which is AT&T's attempt to estimate general locations using latitude and longitude. I don't want to say GPS because it is different than GPS. I believe I've looked at some ping data from December. For the most part, that's what I've reviewed so far.
Have you looked at 2 separate AT&T warrant returns from December 23rd, 2022?
I have.
In your experience with working with AT&T records, is it common or uncommon to have 2 warrants, one that relies on the content of the first in the same day?
It's not uncommon to see a small time period that produces results that would increase the desire, the need for a bigger time period of records. Seeing that entire process happen twice in the same day is extremely rare.
The first AT&T record, we called it today the 48-hour AT&T record of Bryan's call detail record. If you were to take that and do an analysis on a call detail record, how long would that be?
Depends on the analysis, so I'll qualify that answer with looking at what was put into the second warrant that shows us at least parts of that analysis to include a route that was identified. To do it reliably and feel comfortable that I'm accurate, at least 3 hours, and that's if you know what you're doing and you have all the tools at your disposal. Arguably, you could spend half a day or more doing that very easily.
To do that, do you just take these records, printed copy, and know what's on there, or do you have to do something with those records?
You would have to use some type of a mapping platform, software, and you would take the digital copy, which is typically a text file, you would import it into that program, which would then map everything. But if I'm going to use those results, search warrant affidavit, for example, there's a process that I'm going to go through to confirm the accuracy, because in theory, if I'm wrong, The entire linchpin of that case is now hinged on this affidavit that I wrote. So before I commit to swearing out to an affidavit, hey, this is what the phone is doing, X, Y, and Z, there's a further process of just mapping it to validate it. In this case, there's a lot of time distance measurements that need to be performed that can be extremely time consuming. There's some ulterior issues that come up with how that phone is interacting with other cell sites that needs to be analyzed. Again, saying that a very qualified, competent investigator spending half a day just coming up with that basic summary is very reasonable.
In that half a day, you would put that record into a computer program and a map would be produced?
Correct.
What other information besides that call detail record would you need to do this analysis?
In this case, I would want the call detail records. I would want the locavor, it's LOCAVR. And I would want the regional cell tower list from AT&T.
Does AT&T generally provide that regional cell tower list inside of its record that it produces pursuant to the search warrant?
No, I would actually say by policy, they do not. It's a very large file. It typically does not transmit very well to government email. So they would direct users of where they could go online and download.
And have you looked at this record, the 48-hour AT&T search warrant record, the return on that?
I have.
Did that include the regional tower list?
It did not.
Okay. So if you are doing this analysis, you put CDR records into a computer program, you put a regional tower list into the computer program, what does it produce?
The CDRs would show me cell sites that the phone connected to. In this case, even within 48 hours, there's hundreds of those cell sites. So it would take a while to really look at that. The regional cell site list would show me the cell towers that the phone's not interacting with, which can be just as important.
Does it spit out product to you, or does it create something that you can reference to write your next warrant?
Depending on which mapping platform you're using, they all create some type of a map that the person doing the analysis on can interact with, and they can change things, they can save things, they can create work product. Depending on that platform, that's saved in different types of maps, but yes, all of them would have some type of a mapping platform.
Okay. Would that be consistent with this past draft that we heard about earlier?
It's my opinion that Corporal Payne probably is misusing some terms there. I don't see any possibility of the FBI CAS team producing a CAS draft report on the 23rd. I think he's probably mistaken that he saw some type of CAS work product, which would be this map, before they export all those results into a report. So I believe that he probably saw some mapping through a mapping platform. It would really surprise me if there was a physical report. It would be completely out of character.
In that first AT&T report, did you, or request search warrant and affidavit, did you see the request for advanced timing reports?
I did. It's in both search warrants.
Did you get a copy of that and either return?
I have not seen any timing data in this case.
In December of 2022, did AT&T have this advanced timing report?
They absolutely did.
Was it something that they could produce?
It absolutely was.
And in May of 2023, but how's it different to that May of 2023?
Prior to May of 2023, only certain agencies were receiving this timing report, the FBI being one of them. What was referenced earlier about the May 23 date, that is when AT&T started offering the same type of reports. It's a little different, but it's the basic timing report to the state and local law enforcement as well. But prior to that date, state and local law enforcement would have to leverage these reports through federal agencies that had access to them.
Let's talk about the return on the second AT&T warrant. Did that have the tower list, the regional tower list in it?
It did not.
Did it have call detail records?
It did.
What time span?
I believe it's from June 23rd of 2022. The historical was as of the date of December 23rd, but there was also a real-time PIN register that was added that extended, I want to say, to the end of December, maybe very first of January.
What's a real-time PIN register?
So the second search warrant asked for a couple of different things. Historical records going back to June 23rd to the current date, which was December 23rd. The second piece that was asked for is real-time data from the network, which is commonly referred to as a PIN register, or trap and trace. And it's the ability of law enforcement to monitor network connections in real time. So as that phone connects to the network for certain reasons, I can see those connections. It's not a wiretap. I can't hear anything. I can't see content, but I can tell the phone is connected to a particular cell tower. There's also what's referred to as ping data, and that's going to be AT&T's estimation of where the phone is at, and that's provided by latitude and longitude, and that comes in every 15 minutes.
What is the purpose of one of those devices?
I should probably clarify. The third thing was the authorization for a cell site simulator. So it was a combination of all of these. Just as a matter of policy, and I think pretty much every law enforcement agency in the world has adopted this if they can. To use the cell site simulator, you want to see a real-time feed of the phone. Otherwise, you're driving in circles where the phone may not be. So it gives law enforcement the ability to have a general understanding of where a phone is operating or functioning. And then I can use the cell site simulator to do it. There's a number of reasons an agency might do this. This search warrant actually says they were requesting these because they were trying to locate where Mr. Kohberger was.
Going to the understanding what's happening right now, is that used so that you don't just know where the phone was 5 minutes ago, but you know where it is right now?
Within a time period, it's not a perfect system. There is a little bit of a delay, and the information comes in intermittently. So it's not a real-time feed of giving constant evaluation of where that phone is. But if you know what you're looking at and you've done it long enough, you get a pretty good idea.
I heard you say that this is to try to find out where Mr. Kohberger is. In the information that supported this warrant, didn't they already know where Mr. Kohberger was?
I reviewed a lot of documents that clearly state not only did they know where he was, they had a surveillance team with eyes on. So yes, it would be unusual for an agency to request this type of equipment. And I need to qualify that. This truck driving around is about $1 million. It's not something you just park in the garage at night. It's a very expensive resource. It's a very technical resource that requires a lot of training and skill to use properly. So typically when it's used, it is used for, hey, we don't know where this person is at and we need to find them. And to be very honest, I don't have an issue with that part. I've used it 1,000 times. It's a good tool. It's a great tool. However, if I know where a subject is and I'm physically watching him, it's probably disingenuous for me to get a search warrant justifying it that I need to find him.
Makes sense. Thank you. I want to switch gears and talk about the CASBIZ program.
Okay.
Are you familiar with the CASBIZ program?
I am.
Why?
I've worked with a lot of agencies that have used it and accessed it. So I've worked on cases where we've used different mapping platforms to do kind of a compare and contrast as a peer review. So they would create a work product, we would create a work product, and then we would check each other's work. Because at the end of the day, we're just looking for the accuracy. We want to see if there's any errors in that. I would say I probably have worked with the CASBIZ reports several dozen times, maybe as many as 50. I'm aware of some of the updates they've made. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm aware that they have added a feature that you can now input tower density, so you can create these estimated ranges, if you will. And I'm very familiar with the basic settings that have certain controls you can do, like time zone. What time zone am I going to have? Am I going to use the coverage density? Am I going to save my work? Am I going to just exit the program? I physically have seen those features a number of times.
as it relates to this particular case, have you had a chance to look at any exhibits prepared by Detective Mallory using the CAPTABIZ program?
Yes, but I should clarify. One of them I'm pretty familiar with. I believe it's State Exhibit 48 that was used for the grand jury. The others I had never seen until I believe it was last week. So I'm probably gonna have to look at those if you're gonna ask me questions on those. But State's 48, I'm not pretty.
I want to ask you a question about that. I'll ask you some other questions about the records we received last week. I'm going to have you handed what was admitted last week as States R, just another my copy of it so that we know what we're talking about here.
Okay.
I'm curious about what was needed to go into CASVIZ to create that.
So when I open the CASVIZ program, I have to input what I'm going to refer to as source data. So let me define source data is any data that is in electronic format, typically a text file, that the CASVIZ program is going to link to this mapping session and use that source data to create the images we're seeing. I can tell you right off the bat, without a doubt, this one is linked to two different source data. One is going to be a set of CDR records, so the regular AT&T CDRs. And then this particular exhibit would require the regional AT&T tower list, which is a text file that contains all of the cell site locations, most likely the Western Washington, Idaho, and Eastern Washington, Idaho, and Western Montana is typically that region. But there's no way this map was created without the AT&T tower list. It's physically impossible.
Is the AT&T tower list, was that contained in the call detail records that were obtained by search warrants relating to Mr. Kohberger?
It was not.
All right. And in the CASVIZ program, when you input the CDR call detail records and you input the tower list, does that program create any type of log?
It does, and I want to make the record really clear on what I'm testifying to, because it can get kind of confusing when we start talking about different versions. The CASVIZ program offers two styles of mapping. I can just default to a normal size, what they're going to refer to as a wedge shape, which is representing the sector the device connected to. If I was doing that, all I need is the AT&T records, because the AT&T CDRs actually have the tower information that's required for that mapping. As soon as I change that feature, though, to add coverage areas, the estimated coverage areas, and now these little wedge shapes or these sectors are all different sizes, the CAS program has to be linked to a tower list that has location of all of those towers. That's the only way the program knows how to size the cell sites. So I just want to clarify, if I'm mapping the CDRs without coverage areas, all I need is the CDRs. If I'm mapping the coverage areas in the CASVIZ program, I have to have a tower list. This one, I can see three different sectors. Two of them, if anybody sees this exhibit, just to make the record really clear, they're really hard to see. One of them is just under the N as in Nora, under the word Pullman. The other one is right by the L in Pullman. But they're different sizes. And that tells me right off the bat that the AT&T tower list is used.
And why are they different sizes? Mind making, please.
Cell tower density. We see a great big sector right in the middle of this map, and I'm not familiar with the area here. It's basically south of Pullman and south of Moscow, kind of out in the middle of nowhere. Not a lot of cell towers out there, so one tower covers a very large area. Then the other two are going to be in Pullman. It's kind of hard to see on this map, but I believe they are going to be ones that are on Washington State University campus. A lot more cell towers, the coverage is much smaller. So it's just a way to look at tower density to kind of estimate how far certain towers may connect to a phone where others may have a very short range.
And is it based on that difference in towers that causes you to know that a certain type of tower report was used?
Yeah, it is a basic algorithm that uses tower density, and the only way to determine tower density is to have a list that has all of the towers, not just the ones that were used by the cell phone.
Okay. Do we have the list of the tower list that was used by Detective Mallory in developing that exhibit?
Detective Mallory stated he did not use a tower list to create this exhibit, so no, but I'm not sure how to answer that other than I haven't seen one.
Should it be there?
It is physically impossible to create this map without it.
If you had the logs from the CastViz program, would that give you more information about what was used?
It would. We would need the CastViz program as well. The logs are saving certain settings, and it's a JSON format, which is just a software language. We could load that JSON file into the CastViz program, and for the most part, we could replicate exactly what was done.
If I understand that, just turn it around. In order to replicate that and to see what was done, you would need a CastViz program. Is that right?
Correct, and preferably the same version that was used.
And you'd need a JSON file that was made by Detective Mallory. Is that right?
Correct, and depending on where this software program is, we would probably need the source data again because it may not be automatically linked. Anybody who did PowerPoint 10 years ago, you make a PowerPoint on one computer, you save it on a thumb drive, you go to a different computer, all the links are broken. It could create a situation like that. So you would probably need the original source data as well, just to be sure.
What's the original source data?
In this case, it would be the AT&T CDRs and the cell tower, the regional cell tower list.
From that time?
Correct.
Okay.
Well, no, if we're trying to recreate this work, this is where it gets a little bit complex, we would need the exact AT&T tower list that Mallory used but didn't use, which makes it really difficult because AT&T updates these on a fairly regular basis. If he used a November list and I use an April list, the results could be different.
Okay. Why would the results be different given the month of the video?
AT&T could have added or subtracted cell sites in the area, which would change the tower density. They could also reconfigure those cell sites so maybe they point different directions. Given the rural area, 2 or 3 months, I don't think you're going to see much of a change, but it's always possible. So if we're talking about recreating this exhibit exactly the way it was, we would need not just the regional tower list, we would need to know which version of the regional tower list to use.
Is that generally why people in your field save their work?
We're talking best practices 101. We're creating a work product that is going to be used in a forensic nature, not showing how an extraction is done, not showing the source data that I use to create an exhibit. It happens, but for the most part, it's unheard of, especially somebody who is a subject matter expert in digital forensics. I won't say I haven't seen it, but it is rare.
Thank you. Let's move on and talk about the CAST draft. Have you?
I'm sorry, Ms. Bailey. The CAST report.
Draft. Have you?
Can I ask how much longer on this? Because we're 90 minutes. I need to give the court reporter a break.
Mr. Ray, when we left off at our break, I was about to talk to you about the CAST draft report.
Okay.
So we'll start there. Have you reviewed a CAST draft report in Mr. Kohberger's case?
I have.
And from your review of that report, can you tell what records were relied on by Agent Balance to create that report?
That report would include, he had to have the AT&T CDRs, the full 6 months, a tower list to make some conversions that I'm seeing on the report, and also drive test data, which would be another form of source data, and then a mapping platform to ingest the drive test data into to analyze it to create these shapes that are then put into the draft report.
Okay, I think I have that. Do we have the same call detail records that Nick Valance used to create his draft report?
Yes, well, I believe so.
Do those records appear to come from the December 23rd, 2022 to AT&T warrants?
I would say primarily the second warrant from what I've reviewed.
And is that because the CAST draft report spans the full 6 months of those records?
That is correct.
Okay. And those records, did those come from the second AT&T search warrant?
That is also correct.
Can you tell anything about the tower report or how the tower information was used by Agent Nick Valance?
The tower identifiers that are predominantly used, not exclusively, but predominantly used in the CAST draft report did not come from the report AU. There's a conversion that can be made, and someone would have to have the national AT&T tower list, or at least the regional list. And I would take information from the CDRs. I would look at certain columns in this AT&T tower list, and I could get certain identifiers that are now being populated to the CAST report, if that makes sense.
Do we have a copy of the tower list that you believe was used?
We recently received 4 different versions. And when I say versions, they're just by month. And I believe we have August, September, November, and maybe December, or maybe it's in October. I'd have to go back and look. So far, I've only had time to look at the November. And from what I can tell, all of that appears to be accurate.
Would we need the October or the missing month to be able to do our work accurately?
It's a really good practice. I'm sure that's why the FBI included it. If I'm mapping records over a long period of time, like in this case, 6 months, I do want to see the different versions of the tower list to make sure that if a change was made within the network during that 6-month period, a tower I map in July may map differently in November. So it is important to have that data.
We have 4 of the 6 months, but not the other 2.
Correct. It would be helpful to even maybe see May, because there may not have been an update made in late June, early July. So May's would be what I would start with.
Can you tell if drive testing was done to create that CAST draft?
Yes, there's images in the latter part of the report up around slides 100 and above. I believe there's a total of 4 images that were populated to that report that would require drive testing.
When somebody's doing drive testing, do you expect data to be produced?
Absolutely. Creating a work product that uses drive testing and then coming into court and testifying without the drive testing is no different than creating an exhibit like this and then saying, well, we don't have to produce the AT&T records that created this. The source data for drive testing is the drive test.
Do we have the drive testing that was done by the FBI to help create that report?
We have what I believe is the majority. There are some significant pieces missing. I can't say that those missing pieces exist and haven't been turned over, or they were erroneously not collected. I don't know which, but there are some pretty significant pieces that are missing.
I'm going to ask you some questions about that. But first, I want to know when you first saw drive testing data that was produced to us in Discovery. What did that cover?
I found a file in the Discovery, I want to say early December, that included drive test, but it was about a 3-minute sample that covered less than a quarter of a mile in a completely irrelevant location. So it added no value to my analysis at all.
What were you looking for? What time frame and location were you looking for based on the CAST draft report review?
I would expect significant drive testing around any location that coverage maps were being used in the CAST report. I would expect significant documentation on potential routes that this device may have taken. I would expect significant documentation on the crime scene.
You just told us that you think we have most of it, but there's some significant parts that are missing.
Yeah, and I want to qualify that just so it's really clear, because I understand it's starting to get very technical. There's over 500,000 lines of data that was turned over. So I'll make it clear, there's a lot of data that has been produced. I would say, in my opinion, looking at what's been produced, probably 2 or 3% is missing. But it's not the amount of data or the time of the data, it's the locations of the data. Some of the most significant locations in this case, we're missing some data.
Those significant locations, have they been depicted or captured on the CAS draft report?
They have.
And tell me what those locations are. What are we missing?
I am unable to find any measurements along, I believe it's 270, the Moscow Pullman Road. If you drove the most direct route from Pullman to Moscow or vice versa, pretty much as soon as you're leaving Pullman to the time that you arrive in Moscow, we are missing that entire stretch. And if there's ever been a case that we need to look at, what does it look like when a phone travels from Pullman to Moscow? This is probably the case. We have the neighborhood around the crime scene, but we don't have the crime scene. Normally, that wouldn't be too terribly significant, because if it's a flat area, there's not a lot of vegetation or mountains. You could probably interpret the same. The location of this crime scene is very unique because it sits on a mountain. Part of it is shielded by a mountain. There's a lot of other big, thick, dense apartment buildings there. Your phone is going to behave differently inside of that residence than it might on the road behind the residence or in front of the residence. I can't find any drive test data that actually encapsulates any part of the property.
You talked about the device that helps do the drive testing, or that captures the data while you're doing the drive testing. What's that called again?
It's a drive test scanner. The most common one used in law enforcement is created by Road and Schwartz, that same company I referred to earlier. I'm familiar with the hardware that the FBI uses, and it is a Road and Schwartz scanner.
Is it called Gladiator?
Gladiator is the company that sells the product to the FBI. Gladiator actually buys this product from Road and Schwartz, and it does what they call white labeling. So they buy the hardware from Road Schwartz, and they kind of slap their sticker on it, and they put their software in it, and then they sell it to the FBI. But ultimately, it is a Road and Schwartz piece of hardware.
And once you have that piece of hardware, once you have this device, does it just work forever, or is there anything that has to be done to make sure it's working properly?
It is a technical piece of equipment that takes measurements. It is required to be calibrated. The best way that for probably everybody in the courtroom to think of, if we go a little old school, is the old breath test. If you had a DUI and law enforcement couldn't produce the calibration records of the breath test, it was really problematic. Similar thing here. We want to see that the device is calibrated. In this case, it's really important because, keep in mind, I reviewed thousands of these drive tests over my career. There is a significant gap that I believe there's something malfunctioning in the equipment, or the operators are just not paying attention. I can't tell you which one it is. So in this case, the calibration records to show that that device is functioning properly are really critical.
Do we have those calibration records on the device that was there more than one device used?
There's actually 2 devices used.
And was this drive test done on just one day? Is this a one-time shot?
No, I think there's maybe 5 days total that I've seen drive test data collected.
Okay. So now let's talk about the calibration for this instrument or this machine. Did we get records for all the machines that were used by the FBI in this case?
We got the calibration records that were taken prior to the use of these of the samples. It'd be really helpful to have the calibration records after the use. So we kind of need to bookend those, because we know that it left Road Schwartz factory in October and everything was working great. When it came back, we don't know when it came back, and we don't know if it was functioning properly when it came back. It's not uncommon for there to be errors. I saw a report and said it came in and it had 2 errors. It's not the end of the world. the sky doesn't fall. You have to get into the documentation to see what those errors were. Normally, the device kind of self-calibrates itself. If you know what you're looking at, the major concerns that you would see when calibration is off, it becomes very obvious because results are really flawed. That's where I have a concern in this case is we have what I consider a significant chunk of data for specifically a location where the instrument is running. There's no doubt it's functioning, but it's not properly collecting AT&T data, which is concerning as to why.
Because there were multiple drive tests done, and you talk about bookending these calibration reports, would you need to bookend all of the time that the drive testing was done with these calibration reports? And what I'm saying is, if there's something done in November and then drive testing done in December and then more drive testing done in January and then maybe some in March, do you need the bookend calibration reports around each of those drive tests?
You would. To date, I haven't seen any drive test data, I believe, beyond January 5th. And I'm not sure the time zone, so maybe it could creep into January 6th. But if there's any drive test data after the first week of January, I'm unaware of.
Okay. So in our case, which months are we missing?
For the calibration,
Yes.
whatever the next calibration, the FBI would choose when to send these devices in. So whenever that next calibration report was generated for these two devices.
On the calibration certificates we have, I think you told us that after the maintenance, it went back into service and passed inspection, was functioning properly.
Well, when it came in, it didn't have multiple errors, but when it went out, it was functioning properly.
Is that why you need to see the next one on the other side of the drive testing?
That is correct.
Okay. Now, when we're thinking about the data the drive test data that we have that's missing some significant portions, could it be because the machine wasn't working right all the times they tried to do drive testing?
Yes.
Okay. Is it also possible that the FBI agents using this machine weren't properly trained to do the drive test data or to do the drive testing and collect data?
I know of the two FBI agents from prior lives. I believe they're properly trained.
So we're looking at either the machine itself isn't functioning properly, or could that data have been pulled out of what we got?
If we're talking about possible scenarios that would cause the shortcoming of data, maybe it was never captured in the first place. I can't speak to that. The machine erroring, at least during one portion of this drive test, I've seen similar errors before. I'm pretty sure they had a small period of time where it had been a very busy day and it kind of gave up for a little while, like any computer will, and it needed to be reset. Could things be extracted and us not know? That's always possible. I can't rule that out.
Is the missing data important to you to fulfill your duties in Mr. Kohberger's case?
I don't recall when I got involved in this case on the day where I could actually start looking at evidence. I've had a concern since the very first day I saw the cast draft report that there are significant errors in the drive testing. It was before I even saw the drive testing. I can look at the coverage areas and I can tell you they're wrong. So, yes, it's not a concern that they're wrong. People make mistakes. We can fix things. It's a concern that I still don't have the source data that any expert, not just myself, but anybody could sit down and look at and say, okay, I see what's happening here. Here's how we fix this. Unfortunately, that mistake has a ripple effect, and I'm seeing multiple errors that are happening as a result. So that's why this data is important, is we've reached a point that we need to determine, is this just human error? Is this accidental? Is it intentional? Is there other things at play here that's changing this narrative to where there's clearly some manipulation of the original data?
And having that data, will that help us answer that question?
It's the only way we're going to answer that question.
All right, I have just a couple of other questions for you, and I'm going to depart the cast report and the drive test data a little bit set. As an investigator or as a person doing an analysis of this case, did the drive test data tell you where a phone traveled to indicate other investigation that you should do?
Technically, the call detail records tell us that. The drive test data help us become more accurate with that. AT&T is one of the best companies in this particular situation to show device movement because we get a constant connection. So when, and I will emphasize, when all of the data is mapped, and I'm talking about the CDRs, we can get a really good idea. Hey, a phone traveled north for 10 miles and then it traveled east. The drive test data would actually allow us to replicate and recreate these tower handoffs that we're seeing to come up with that first theory to now we can say, in order to do this and hit these towers in the sequence that it did, it has to be driving on this highway. And then when it went east, it most likely turned onto this highway. So the drive test data helps us get very specific with what the CDRs mean.
As an investigator in performing an analysis work done in this case, when you have the CDRs, the call detail records that tell you where a phone's been, is that useful in directing your investigation to what other evidence might be out there, like videotapes?
Qualify my answer because I'm not sure if you're asking specifically for this case or in general. Yes, you map all of the data. And especially if you're going to justify 6 months worth of data on somebody's cell phone, you map every single connection that there is in those records. From what I have reviewed, the FBI mapped 6% of the data that came in. Mallory's testimony and what I've seen through here, he was up to about 18%. So by either standard, more than 80% on both accounts were never mapped or accounted for. And I'm not talking overall from every single day for 6 months. I'm talking about the time frames that are chosen. So for example, this time period that's represented here is where I'm getting the 18%.
And that's the 48 hours?
This is specifically from 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. on the morning of the 13th, arguably the most critical time period of this entire investigation. They mapped a handful of connections. When I say handful, they mapped 18%. When you add the other 82%, it tells a much more detailed story. When we put the drive test data on top of that, you can get even more refined. But to answer your question on any case, that's this case. On any case, and we teach best practices. We've established best practices going back to 2008 in law enforcement of what you do with this type of data. It is a terrible practice to justify probable cause for this very detailed call detail records that give breadcrumb-like trails for individuals and then not map it. We justify an entire probable cause statement saying we have to have this. Not mapping it and then making decisions and work products with leaving that out is extremely problematic.
Last week, we received some additional records that Detective Mowry found when he was preparing for his testimony on this mission to compel. Have you had a chance to review those records?
I have. A couple of them are very technical, so I'm not going to say that I've mastered them yet, but I have a good idea of what was provided and what it means.
Based on your, I guess not as thorough as you'll do, review of these records, do you have a sense as to whether these records matter to us and what we're doing to defend Mr. Kohberger?
Given the timing of these records, from what I can tell in the emails that were produced by Detective Mowry, these records were generated on the 23rd of December. It's when everything starts with probable cause statements. If I had to pick a time when the wheels fell off the wagon, that's the date. There are statements and there's assumptions made in the records that will never be supported by the data. There's a lot of claims that are said in these emails, and even the name files of the records are problematic. It does not represent what it's claimed to represent.
Sounds like those might be pretty important to us defending Mr. Kohberger.
I could give examples, but I know it's a very technical thing, so I'm not, it could be extremely impactful to either side. I'm not saying just in defending Mr. Kohberger, it could be extremely impactful in prosecuting Mr. Kohberger. The problem's the problem, not what the data helps or hurts.
The content of the data, though, is it helpful to us in representing Mr. Kohberger?
It absolutely is helpful. Everything that I've seen to date is concerning to me because it's exculpatory. And I need to clarify this. When all of the records are produced and the dust settles and I have time to review it, I reserve the right to say, no, now I'm seeing everything. Here's what I'm seeing. Because of the piecemealing of the data, because of the missing data, because of data that I'm reviewing that is incredibly inaccurate, everything that is missing is absolutely in the benefit of the defense right now. There's other reports that I believe are missing that I can't tell you are in the benefit of Mr. Kohberger or in the benefit of the state. If I was contacted on December 1st by Moscow Police Department, there are things I would have absolutely said, you get this today. Do not hesitate, and especially come December 23rd. Not because of who it's helpful for, but because those documents are the only things we're going to get that's going to be able to allow us to interpret what it really means. When we don't get those documents and we piecemeal things, it creates this narrative that is very harmful for the defense's case. As I've got more documents, I'm finding it's not harmful for the defense's case. There's a lot of misstatements that have been made. So yes, to your question, to date, it is very helpful for Mr. Kohberger. I reserve the right to change that opinion in 6 months, depending on what type of documents are released and what's out there.
Fair enough. I need just a minute, but I don't think I have any other questions.
Thank you.
Mr. Ray, thank you. I don't have any other questions right now, but hold on. The prosecutor might.
All right. Ms. Taylor, Bethany?
No, no, we don't have any questions at this time.